In a perfect world, every tenant and every lease term would be spotless. No issues, no surprises, just year after pleasantly uneventful year. But tenants do sometimes, and almost always unexpectedly, request early termination of their lease. And other times, a difficult tenant causes you to have no other choice but to do the same. Early termination is unfortunately just a part of being a landlord. Welcome back, Loopers. My name is Sydney, and I'm a content creator here at DoorLoop. As you probably know, a small percentage of tenants will terminate their lease early. And when this happens, you'll want to know what your options are so you're prepared. For this reason, I put together this video on what to do if your tenant terminates their lease early. But before moving on, if you're here just looking for a simple lease termination letter template, you can go ahead and download that with the link down in the description. First off, let's talk about reasons why a tenant might need to terminate early. This is important to think about to understand more about what might be going on with your tenant. But more importantly, in most states, there are legitimate reasons for terminating a lease that you should know. So here they are. First is losing a job. Losing a job is a serious financial event. In the case of a job loss, the tenant may need to let go of their lease because they can no longer meet the financial obligation. While it's never fun to deal with an early termination, it may be much more costly trying to hold on to that tenant and then eventually having to pursue an eviction. Instead, consider adding an early termination fee to your new lease agreement to make up for the loss replacing the tenant. The second reason is non-livable housing. There are a number of things that you as a landlord can do to allow the tenant to rightfully claim early termination. The most important is making sure that the property is deemed livable housing. Virtually every state has laws ensuring that the tenant lives in a clean and safe environment. If they don't, they can rightfully terminate their lease. This includes things like a heater if in cold climate, hot water heater, a working roof that keeps out the elements, proper floors and walls that aren't falling apart, no severe health hazards such as mold or lead, and it's important to make sure you're not in violation of this, not only because it's the right thing to provide a proper place to live for your tenant, but also because if you don't, in most states, your tenant can claim the property unlivable and rightfully terminate their lease without owning any of the remaining rent balance. The third reason is major financial challenges, such as an illness, divorce, or the death of a loved one. Similar to losing a job, other events like becoming sick or a divorce can heavily impact finances. Some or all of these events can be considered valid reasons for requesting an early lease termination. Depending on the state, though, they typically aren't. Still, you might want to consider this a reason for them to terminate the lease early, as holding on to a tenant could be much more taxing financially than taking the early termination. The fourth reason is military duty. Military duty is a valid reason for the lease termination and is written into federal law via the War and National Service Member Civil Relief Act. The service member simply needs to give a 30-day notice, and they're allowed to exit the property without remaining rent obligation. The fifth reason is domestic abuse. Domestic abuse and violence are another event-related item that can be a legitimate reason for terminating a lease written into many state laws. This is one of the few situations as well where your duty as a landlord to provide them a safe environment to live comes into play as well. So while your state law may or may not have something detailing about your tenant's exact situation, you may still want to do what you can to let the tenant move out without the hassle of a penalty. Now let's talk about what to do in the event of your tenant terminating their lease agreement early, specifically how to mitigate the sudden loss of a tenant. This won't help you immediately, but taking these steps will ensure that you're not caught off guard in the future or you're better prepared for it. But before I tell you how, make sure to subscribe for tons of property management resources and tips. If you're enjoying this video so far, give it a thumbs up. Now, here are some tips. First is to properly screen your tenants. While there is nothing you can do to guarantee that tenants are responsible about how they leave their lease, properly screening tenants does make it likely that they'll be more responsible. The second is to add an early termination clause to your lease agreement. An early termination clause simply details your policy for when a tenant wants to terminate the lease early. The most notable includes notices on the notice period, the early termination fee, and a written notice of termination for liability reasons. The third tip is to add a buyout option while you're at it. Buyout in this case refers to the ability of the tenant to pay a portion of the remainder of their lease early to terminate their lease. Typically, this fee is around 2 months' rent. The fourth tip is to review the lease during signing. It's easy to want to get the signing over and done with quickly, but if you don't take a minute to read through the lease with your tenant, chances are they never will either. And if they don't, they'll have no idea about your early termination or eviction policies. The better they understand those, the more likely they are to want to follow them and to not incur extra expenses. As a result, you end up with less headache and reduced chance of financial loss. If you're looking for an early termination notice template, like I said, you can find that down in the description. While it's not fun to think about, sometimes your tenants do surprise you with an early termination of their lease agreement, and sometimes the tenant's behavior causes you to want to terminate them early. When that's the case, you can use this early termination lease template to notify your tenant, and like I said, it'll be linked in the description. If this video was helpful, make sure to check out this playlist for more free checklists and templates, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!